Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the professor, and this is the moment of truth. There's a contingent within the black community of a bunch of losers, and I'm talking about the black feminists here, these land whales and otherwise undesirable individuals who basically have taken to attacking black men full time because they know they'll never get one. And they make saints in their minds out of certain writers and authors who make a career out of attacking black men. Bell Hooks falls in that category. Now the white media is talking about Bell Hooks as if she was simply a writer, as if she wrote boring little novels or something. They give absolutely no mention to all the damage that she did to the black community, how she did as much as anyone to begin the process of popularizing anti-black male hatred within the black community. We are adults here, so we're going to have an adult conversation about Bell Hooks, the part she played in fracturing the black community, and how we can stop the next Bell Hooks from dividing us again. Bell Hooks, like Alice Walker and Toni Morrison, wanted to be accepted by the dominant society, particularly by white women. More than that, she wanted to be a white woman. This is something you find that is very common among the black feminists. You recall Oprah Winfrey gave that pathetic interview with Barbara Walters, where Barbara Walters asked her, did she want to be white? And she broke down crying and said, yes, yes. There you have it. It's not just Oprah Winfrey. This is what all of these black feminists are coming from. That's the direction that they're coming from. This is the reason that they do what they do. There is a fundamental jealousy that black feminists have for white women, and jealousy always breeds anger. No matter what the black feminists try to tell you, that black men are just so smitten with white women, here's the real truth. The average black feminist is more obsessed with what's going on in a white woman's drawers than even the most Carlton Banks color-struck black male could ever be. People like Oprah and Toni Morrison and Alice Walker and Bell Hooks and all of these angry black feminists that you see on a rampage all the time who attack my channel or who attack brothers like TBA and Tariq on Twitter, they are furious. They're furious because they know that they want to be something they can never be, a blonde-haired, blue-eyed white woman. And this anger on the part of the black feminists has deep roots. They were angry at themselves, angry at society for a requirement they could never meet, angry at white women for flaunting their whiteness in front of them all the time. But these black feminists live in a society where they're not allowed to exercise their anger against those who are the source of it. But the society does allow them to vent their anger at other black people, particularly at black men, and this was something the white feminists eagerly encouraged. So why was it then that you had these black women who found themselves being courted by these white feminists? It has its roots in the government. The civil rights movement and the black power movement that followed it were a legitimate and terrifying threat to white power, especially at the highest levels of the U.S. government. The government desperately needed to find a way to split up these black power movements. But how? They couldn't do it along lines of class because, thanks to white supremacy, all black people were economically in the same boat. So they wouldn't be able to exploit any class jealousies based on who makes more money. They couldn't do it along the lines of religion either because, thanks to white supremacy, most all black people are Christians, so there was no religious animosity they could play on. You know, all the normal, usual lines of division that they would use, say, in a foreign country, that simply didn't apply in the U.S. Not where black people were concerned, but there was one thing that they knew that they could use: gender. White supremacy knows its victims very well. They know our insecurities and dysfunctions and idiosyncrasies. They ought to know they're the reason that we got saddled with all these problems in the first place. White supremacy knew to send in its female operatives, the white feminists, in order to see if they could drive wedges between black men and black women. So here come the Gloria Steinems and the Andrea Dworkins. We know today that Gloria Steinem, as early as the 1950s, was in bed with the CIA. So when these white feminists started approaching black women, that was a government operation that was taking place. They used a vocabulary of patriarchy and male privilege, terms that would make sense if you were talking about white society, because with the power concentrated there and the way that it's arranged, those terms would make sense in a white context, but it makes no sense whatsoever in a black context. You cannot use the same terms with black men as you do with white men because we share no common ground, not economically, not socially, or politically. There is no tradition of black men denying black women the vote because we didn't have the power to or the desire to. There is no tradition of black men systematically deciding that black women are going to make so much percentage less than black men because we don't have the power to decide who eats and who doesn't eat in our own communities. In white society, they were accustomed to using violence to make sure that white women stayed in their place. The first slaves in Europe were white women. So you cannot make a comparison between what goes on in the black community and the white community, especially not where the behavior of black men vis-a-vis white men are concerned. But unfortunately, a lot of these black feminists who started going to these predominantly white colleges in the late 60s and in the 70s and such, they thought that they were smarter than everyone else. They thought that they somehow had more on the ball and they were more gifted. They were the talented 10th. I just got through telling you yesterday about Amy Chua, the so-called tiger mom, and her asinine little book, The Triple Package. What was the first and most damning of the qualities that she claimed was part of the triple package for success? A notion of superiority. Yeah, you see, it's not just Amy Chua and her ilk who are on that mess. A lot of these black feminists who were getting into these predominantly white schools and universities in the late 60s, they seemed to believe that they were some sort of overclass as well. But the golden blackjack that the white feminists used as entree to get black women to start believing what they said was to tell them that, all women are sisters. All of us are sisters. And why things would be so much different if women were in charge. Oh, we are nurturers. We bear the children. Oh, if women aren't the ones who start the wars, the men do. And if women were in charge, things would be so much better. Of course, these black women on these college campuses never bothered to ask, how did Queen Elizabeth treat the people of Africa when she was in charge of Britain? You can look at the Anglo-Zulu Wars if you want to find out how Queen Elizabeth treated the black people of South Africa. And of course, none of those black feminists asked about Margaret Sanger and whether or not she was any different than any other white male eugenicist. All it took was a few phony words of insincere courtesy, and the black feminists on these college campuses forgot all about the fact that just a few years earlier, it had been white women who were leading the charge to stop black children, including black girls, from going to the same schools as their white children. White women were the ones screaming racial slurs and threats at black girls just trying to go to a school. These black female collegiates forgot all about that. I suppose they were just too glad to have white women who were talking to them without screaming racial slurs and threats. The black feminist is a wannabe white woman. And as anyone who's ever dealt with gangbangers will tell you, the only thing worse than a real gangbanger is a wannabe, because they'll do 10 times as much damage just to convince everyone they're the real thing. And so it was with the black feminist. They took all the ridiculous talking points they picked up from their white feminist pals and immediately began fighting black men. The Black Panthers had been united behind dismantling police violence and white economic control in their communities. They were laser focused on that singular goal, breaking the enforcement arm of white supremacy, and they made great progress to the point that California, the most powerful state in the Union, had to change its laws just to keep the Black Panthers from intimidating the thugs with badges. But then, the Black Panthers meetings started to become disrupted. The regular discourse of what was going to be done to put some pain on white supremacy today soon gave way to discussions and arguments about gender roles. You soon had this or that black woman who would begin saying that the black men were no better than the white men who ran white supremacy because black women were not in charge. The regular talking point that black feminists like Angela Davis would regurgitate that they picked up from the white feminists was, it seemed to me the black men were barking out the orders and the black women were just taking notes. Instead of focusing on dismantling white supremacy, Black Panther meetings began to devolve into these newly minted black feminists trying to dismantle a phony black patriarchy that didn't even exist. Bell Hooks was one of the people who helped to push this idea. Her works became required reading for the black feminists who wanted to pretend as if somehow she was not propping up white supremacy, she was instead standing up for herself. But it wasn't black men who were oppressing black women. That little factoid always seemed to get left out of Bell Hooks' little books. And you know what else got left out? That the white feminists who were encouraging black women to engage in this behavior, they didn't do all these things to undermine white supremacy. The white media talked a good game. At least on paper, you would think that white women were doing something. But the reality was, when you looked at what was actually happening in the white community, white women were still on the team. How many white women were dismantling white supremacy in the name of toppling the patriarchy? How many white organizations did white women lead the charge to tear apart? None. You name any overt or covert white power organization. I don't care if it's the Klan or the CIA. Did you see white women working to undermine the Klan and tear that apart? And you can't have any more of a male-dominated organization than the KKK. Did you ever see Gloria Steinem working from the inside to take down the CIA under the guise that women should be in charge? No. And you didn't see it in white corporations either. The only problem that the white feminists had, at least the ones who were not part of the establishment, was the fact that they weren't allowed to hold the whip. They didn't have a problem with white supremacy, they just had a problem with their place in it. They wanted to hold the whip. But attacking black men made the black feminists feel closer to the white women who they aspired to be. And in large part, they were right. These white feminist females hated black men, all the while lusting for black men. The black solidarity that had put white supremacy in fear began to crumble. Black feminists made it a point to pose for photo ops with this or that white feminist to be in their rallies, and the white media took plenty of pictures and made sure that the black women would be shown because this was all propaganda. This began to spread. As more and more black women saw that, they began thinking, well, there must be something to it. After all, you got these black women who are being given airtime and they're being quoted in magazines, stuff that they hadn't seen before. These black women must be important, so something they're doing must be right. Right? And so the white media propaganda began to take hold and began to grow, and it had the desired effect. The Bell Hooks and Alice Walkers and others began preaching the gospel that black men were black women's oppressors and that black women were better off without all of this patriarchy, and that black men were the enemy, and the white media signal boosted and amplified that lie. Bell Hooks and her ilk taught black women that once black men were no longer in the picture, it would be an uninterrupted success story for black women. Instead, what happened was the government gave a couple of consolation prizes, a couple of government programs, welfare and food stamps, a couple of government jobs at the post office or the county clerk's office. Corporations had a couple of minor jobs, but you banged your head on the steel ceiling soon enough. You could tell that the black feminists, having done their work that the white feminists told them to do, they were waiting. They were waiting to be welcomed in by their sisters, their blonde-haired, blue-eyed sisters. They were waiting to be welcomed with open arms. Instead, the white feminists turned their backs on them and walked away. Well, that was for the few who hung around. Most of them didn't stick around that long. So when you look at an Oprah Winfrey or an Alice Walker or a Bell Hooks, they were all inventions of the white media. If it wasn't for King's World Media, nobody outside of Chicago would have ever heard of Oprah Winfrey. We all see how well her media empire went when she didn't have King's World backing her up anymore. Were it not for white publishers, nobody would have heard of Bell Hooks, Alice Walker, or Toni Morrison. You think these white publishers who don't even allow black people to work in their offices publish these black feminist books because they like them? The same white media who never mentions a black author's book except to criticize it gave these black feminists glowing reviews. What, you think that was because the white media thought their books were so groundbreaking and challenging? No. If these black feminists were saying anything that substantively attacked or even challenged white supremacy, then the white media would have ignored them the same way they ignore all the other black writers. Bell Hooks did as much as anyone to glorify attacking black men and to try to intellectualize it and make it sound like this is scholarly. She spread division and confusion in the black community at a moment when we could not have afforded it. She diverted attention from white supremacy and got black people fighting each other, fighting over patriarchy, something that doesn't even exist in the black community. Her books also served as a jumping-on point for a lot of other ideologies that did not originate in our community. Intersectionalism and the like got its hooks, no pun intended, into our community largely through her. She was pushing that stuff back before it was cool. She pushed the pathetic idea that when black men point out that black women are not oppressed because of their gender, they're oppressed because of their race, black women should respond, "I don't have to choose my race over my gender." That's intersectionalism, folks. And if black people, I'm sorry, if black feminists were the ones who were in charge, maybe you could play that game. But we live in a world where the white supremacists are firmly in charge. And the way that they have arranged the entire society, indeed the entire world, it ain't based on religion, it's not based on language, it's not based on class, it's not based on gender. White supremacy is based on one thing and one thing only: anti-black racism. Any black person who denies that reality is flirting with suicide. But that's what Bell Hooks encouraged fully 2.5 generations of black women to do. But of course, she also gave rise to a circle of confused cronies, like the sexually suspect Jewel Woods. This guy bragged about how he would go to Bell Hooks' home to seek out her wisdom. Talk about the blind leading the stupid. He then wrote a document called the Black Male Privilege Checklist. Oh yeah, he did that years before the black male privilege talking point became cool. And Jewel Woods also claims to run an organization called the Renaissance Male Project. And what's their mission? Their mission is advocacy and accountability for black males. Now, when somebody claims they got an organization that's supposed to be interested in black men, but first thing they seem to be doing is wagging their finger at black men, that's how you know they don't give a dang about black men. Oh, by the way, just as a side note, this Jewel Woods character, he also wrote an article about sex tourism in Brazil, the gist of which seemed to be that if you're a black woman who can't get a man, it's because all the black men went and moved to Brazil. Just lunatic stuff. This is one of Bell Hooks' acolytes. We hear so much about a patriarchy that simply doesn't exist in our community, but nobody ever mentions the fact that we actually do have a matriarchy in the black community. A matriarchy where black boys grow up without a father in the home, and their mother tells them black men ain't spit. Seems to me this Woods character is a product of that kind of abusive environment, and now he wants to prove that he hates black men as much as the hood rats do. He spouts the same brain-dead gibberish about class and race as Bell Hooks did. The Black Panthers' H. Rap Brown said 50 years ago that class arguments are a luxury black people cannot afford because class distinctions don't apply to us. Class is the dividing line between white ethnic groups. It's irrelevant to us. So when you hear anyone come among us and start talking about patriarchy and male privilege and class, that's a black person who is nothing more than a programmed robot for white supremacy. Their job is to disrupt what we're doing, to sow the seeds of confusion and dissension among us. Bell Hooks spent decades driving wedges between black people. She did as much as anyone to popularize gender warring among us before we even had a term for it. Her job was to disrupt our efforts to tear down white supremacy, to keep black men and black women bickering amongst themselves, so that white supremacy could continue its evil work undisturbed. The Pandora's box of infighting and confusion that she unleashed within the black community has ravaged our community for the last few decades, and it continues to plague us all the way up to the present. And we're going to be spending decades trying to repair the damage that she and her pals did, and that their would-be acolytes continue to do. Her books should be recognized for exactly what they are: a how-to guide on how to get oppressed people to stop focusing on fighting their oppressors and to instead focus on fighting each other. And that's what she should be remembered for. Good day, and be one.